Hello everybody. Welcome along to this Light and Land winter image live stream. It's a special. We've blown the budget, and we've split the budget four ways because zero goes into four very nicely. I'm joined very happily by Astrid, by Tom, and by Ed. Hello everyone. How are we all doing?
Hi Sam. Hi everybody.
Hello, all good.
Hello.
Good. Terrible to ask you all the same question at the beginning. That was awful planning on my part. I'm very happy to have the gang with me because we wanted to end the live stream year with a bit of a special, and I wanted to get a few people who'd been on before, and we wanted to give it this winter image theme. I've just realised though, terrible planning. Why have none of us got Christmas hats, jumpers, or is that just a bit tacky?
We're all very cool. Oh, Astrid's cooler than us.
Oh, we really didn't plan this.
Typical Astrid organisation. She's fully prepared as ever.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, we've been shamed there, boys, haven't we? But just while everyone out there is joining, let us know as ever where you're watching from, and we are going to be going through a variety of images from all of us. All four of us are going to share some of our images. We've got 4 images each, and we're going to sort of take it one by one and go through one at a time. I can see lots of people joining, lots of regulars. Barbara in Bucks, James in Kent, Ken, our Isle of Sheppey correspondent, and Fred over there in New Hampshire. Fantastic. You're winning, Fred, in terms of furthest away at the moment. And Dave is with us from Reading as usual. So if you are with us, let us know. And absolutely tonight, if you have any questions about shooting in winter conditions and or comments or questions about the images we're going to show you, feel free to pop those in on Facebook or YouTube. We can see the comments and I will share them and ask the various members of our team tonight. I'll get to answer your questions. Melanie's with us from California. Melanie, you've just taken the furthest away prize. Well done. Brenda, hi Wickham. Not as far, but equally splendid. And a Wimbledon watcher there as well. Right, that's enough rambling from me. We're going to get into it. Now, just before we do, we've just got a tiny bit of housekeeping that Astrid and I want to talk about, and then we're going to jump into the winter images. But Astrid, we have got the exhibition coming up next year, which you and I have talked about on the live stream before. But we did want to mention that coming up next year, we've got a couple of live streams specific to the exhibition, but also it might be interesting for people generally to do with how you curate images and how you might put together a panel. So Astrid, do you want to just elaborate on that for a moment or two, and then we'll jump into the winter stuff?
Yeah, basically we are going to have Charlie on the stream early next year in January, and he will be talking about talking to us about how to curate your images. So how do you put together a panel for your 2-meter wall space? Many people have told us they haven't exhibited before, so there may be some useful tips and tricks on how to put something together. We'll show some examples, and we'll be talking about that in early January. And also coming up in February, and that's something we can sort of share for the first time really, our partners Siwi, who are on board with us for this exhibition, will be on the live stream, and they will talk about printing and framing your images. There will be offers on because they will be able to support any exhibitor with printing and framing and so forth. So that's coming up in February. So any of you who are thinking of participating but who is unsure how to do it, there will be all the help that you might need earlier next year, January and February. So
that's
keep
right.
your eyes peeled.
We will post those soon in terms of posting the links up for Facebook and YouTube, and we'll also get those out on the newsletter when we Astrid as well. So once we've just nailed down the exact times and etc. But it will be Tuesday nights, and like I said, that first one should be January 9th, but we will confirm that very soon. Right, talking of exhibiting, there's an exhibit's worth of fantastic winter images here tonight. Now that was a rough segue, if ever there was one. You know what's really cool, guys? You know what I've just noticed? Whenever I flash it where someone's from, we just knock out Tom's face. So I may just... Tom, I may just leave that on when you're chatting. Don't take it personally. You'll be fine.
No, that's fine. I've had it
Good
before.
Man. Good man. All right, let's get into it. So we've got, like I say, we've got 4 images from each of us tonight, and I thought it might just be fun to walk through, learn a bit of the backstories. We can all comment on each other's images, and if you guys, like I say, watching have got any questions at all about the location, about some of the technical things, about the artistry, whatever it may be, we want this to be really interactive. So do let us know in the comments, like I say. Ed, we're starting with you, sir, and I don't want this to be a complete love-in, because it could just be us saying, oh, aren't our images great? But I really do like this one. It's very compelling. And I think because it's got some intrigue and ambiguity, a little bit of scale, along with all sorts of lovely graphical things going on as well. So maybe just tell us a little bit of the background, Ed, of where we are and a bit of the process of making the image.
Yeah, delighted, Sam. So this is Iceland. What more fitting place to start a winter image show than there, perhaps. It's a place called Dyrhólaey Beach. You'll find I am, in fact, fluent in Icelandic. But I noticed actually it has been labelled on Google Maps as the Endless Black Beach for those non-Icelandic speakers out there. And that's what it is. And you're right. I mean, the sort of compelling reasons for making this picture, I suppose, were 2 of the things that you've already highlighted, which is the ambiguity of scale, I think, the contrast, clearly. It was an easy decision for me to make this a black and white image, given it's mostly black and white. There's black volcanic sand, there's the breaking waves and the snow, and so taking the color out was effectively an exercise in just removing a color cast, and then concentrating on that lovely sort of twisting shape as the beach rolls up and exits towards the top of the frame. So those are the reasons for making the image. I mean, I suppose it's when you think about black and white snowscapes, you're thinking about people like Michael Kenner, etc., who does that wonderful work in Hokkaido, and that was really at the back of my mind, making this sort of very abstract image. But the lack of scale is an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I suppose that that section of beach is probably, at least half a mile, if not a mile long. I mean, I'm standing on a cliff edge there, which is about 100 meters high, looking down. So that gives you some idea of the scale. But it's just a very simple composition, but one that really appealed.
It's funny about the ambiguity, because I may well have, and I haven't been there, but I may well have guessed you might have been up high, but it could equally literally be you looking at your feet. Maybe the zigzags are maybe too short, and there's too much repetition there for really, but it could be because there is some detail in the snow patching on the right, and like I say, it could just literally be 6 feet in front of you. And so that's what when I first saw it, that was kind of the first thing I felt was, wow, that's so striking graphically, and also a really bold positioning, straight down the middle, so the 2 sides can just sort of bite off each other, sort of thing.
Yeah, well, bold, given I was 100 meters up in the air and
yeah, why don't you get
on the edge of a precipice more than anything else? Yeah, I get what you say. Yeah.
No, it's cool.
It's interesting. David Ward, in his books, I'm sure many people have read them. Talks about one of the key elements in his work being mystery, doesn't he? And that I mean, I don't often find myself shooting with that in mind, but in this case, it was that sort of sense of mystery by cutting out the horizon and by leaving it ambiguous in terms of scale was really compelling about making this picture.
So just as a very quick thing before we move on, and we've got 16 images, so I'm going to keep us rolling tonight because it'd be really nice to get through them all if we can. From a just a purely technical point of view, you're framing this, you look through your viewfinder or your live view, whatever it might be. I know obviously with snow, and we're going to touch on this a couple of times tonight, however, we're not just packed this full of snow, everyone. We've tried to consider all sorts of shooting scenarios and locations if you're out in winter, and the quality of light and all the rest of it. But was there anything technically you were just keeping your eye on, Ed, from a point of view of capturing that to get that, as close to where you might want to go in the edit? You were mentioning the Michael Kenner, that kind of feel, but in the field, was there anything you were doing just to keep your eye on things there? Yeah,
I mean, I suppose a couple of things. I mean, I wanted to retain some detail in the waves rather than having that all just white out. So there was a consideration of shutter speed. Now, what's the right shutter speed to do that? I mean, you don't want the kind of ice rink effect on both sides, or I didn't at the time. So I mean, I think probably that was maybe at a second, something like that, just to give it enough of a blur without losing the detail. And then there's the other obvious thing to consider, obviously, when you're shooting snow is if you want to retain detail in the highlights rather than blow them all out, you've got to expose for the highlights and trust your camera sensor to bring up any shadow detail that you want. So metering is obviously quite important. And not believing your camera's inbuilt metering system, which thinks everything is a sort of mid-tone or a grey colour. And actually, if necessary, bracketing or taking that into consideration, looking at the histogram, making sure you're not clipping out to the right, is something that you've got to take into consideration, as well as anchoring your tripod down if you're 100 meters up in the air and facing a gale, which is what was happening.
Yeah, safety first, kids. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Ed. That's a really great start. I'm going to just keep us rolling, as we say. Now, trees feature a little bit tonight. All of us, actually, interestingly, I think, yes, we did. All of us put a tree image in, or two, even sometimes. And I suppose for landscape photographers generally, it's a very rich subject matter for us. There's something appealing in all seasons, I find. Of summer, a little bit more difficult, but this is Astrid's image, and again, I don't want to turn this into a love off, but again, I love it, and I love all of these tonight. But I suppose there's the very graphical nature of it, but also, Astrid, I'm seeing a few little, very small amount of yellow leaves dotted around, which just give little sparkles. So Astrid, can you tell us a little bit about the background here, maybe some of the thought processes, and maybe a bit about your tree love as well?
Yes, well, the background for me, selecting this one and putting it in, it's a very local image, local to where I live in Surrey, and it's got no snow. The reason why I selected it, I don't think actually I've got any snow pictures, is that it snows very rarely here where I live, and unless you're able to get into the far north or into countries where it snows more often, you're not going to get much snow. But what you can get, and this picture was taken in December, so in winter, you can have fantastic light and shadow. We can see some light here at the bottom, which I loved. It was a side light that sort of shone through the birches, which we kind of lit, and the background is completely dark. And what we can also get is a lot of detail. So the little leaves were still on the trees, hadn't been blown off. And that's something you can get in winter down here in the southeast of England anyway. And that's why I selected this, because it's something we can all find, all of us who live in these sort of climes. Just going out in winter, if we don't find snow, we might find something else like that. And I love trees. I love the graphic nature of them. I love birches because of the sort of color of the trunks, and it's sort of cool and warm. So the background is dark, almost sort of bluish, and the foreground and the leaves and the ground is sort of with warm colors. And I love the interplay between the two of them.
Yes, I think the colors are, because this, again, because it's so graphical, it could be something we might think about in black and white, seeing black and white by the time, but the colors play such an important role in this, just counterpointing, and there's just those little, the leaves, like we say, the yellow, and the base as well, that color on the ground really just kind of supports everything. And maybe in black and white we would have, well, not maybe, definitely we would have lost some of that, which supports the structure in a way as well. I think, and just Astrid, a point I'm going to pick up there, Teresa's asked a question which I'm going to come to in a second, Teresa, which is about protecting the gear. I'm going to come to that in a sec, because there's a couple more, maybe more images based on areas that are a bit more extreme coming up. So we'll come to that, Teresa, with your question about protecting your gear. So I will be there. But just back on this, Astrid, I think you did make a really good point. Here in the UK, especially where I am down in Dorset, I don't see snow. I've seen it once since I've been living here properly, which is about once in 12 years of any note anyway. So I think we are going to cover tonight a variety of locations in the world, because we know a lot of you travel, and obviously we offer that as Light and Lands. But we do obviously encourage you to go out and shoot more regularly. So with that in mind, Astrid, just final question, then we'll move on here. Do you find, actually this is a question really more personal to your shooting, do you find you are inspired to get out in winter a lot? Is it your kind of season because of the quality of the light and the locations? Or are there other times of year which actually are more productive for you?
I love winter. I also love spring and autumn. Summer probably photographically my least favorite season, but I love winter. I love the detail I can see. I mean, with trees, for example, when they're in leaf, you don't see much of the structure other than the trunk. But when they're bare, you see all the branches, and that really appeals to me. So I don't mind the weather. I love going out when it's cold. Just wrap up warm, and that's it. And as you say, the light has fantastic quality. Just last week where we were, and we'll come to that in a minute, we had some fantastic lights, sun low in the sky, and it's a wonderful season to go out and shoot. So definitely don't hide behind the fireplace or something in winter.
No.
It's great. The graphics are strong, light is fantastic, so no reason not to go out shooting.
And it's not a brutal get-up time either, which is
no,
absolutely
fantastic.
happy days. So you wrap up warm, wrap up warm, put your Christmas hat on like Astrid, and off you pop. So cool. Okay, I'm going to keep us rolling. And Tom, we're going to come to you now. And then I'm going to throw a question at you that Teresa's thrown in, and we can all chirp in on an answer for Teresa. But just, Tom, briefly, fantastic. There's all sorts of stuff I love going on here as well. But tell us where we are and a bit of the background.
Thank you, Sam. Dallas Divide, I'm sure a lot of viewers know this, have seen it, or have even been there. I was running a workshop with Charlie 2012, so this is an old photo, and I have no shame in sharing old pictures. They're probably my favorite ones. And we got to Dallas Divide. There'd been no snow for a week. We were staying about an hour away, and then one morning the snow just hit, and this was our first we said, right, get in the cars, we're rushing, we'll start at Dallas Divide and then we'll split and go wherever we want to go. But this is a shot that we, as a group and as Charlie and I, wanted to get for everyone and for us. And it was that, the tricky thing actually when most people got there was they were trying to isolate a lot. And I remember Charlie leaning over to me, because it was in my early days, and he said, I think what works here is the bigger picture. You can isolate, but go for the big picture. And I think in winter, you often have these whiteouts, and so it highlights individual shapes, or the lone tree or the lone fence. And so your brain is often maybe triggered towards looking for the simplicity that snow and whiteouts bring. This is not a whiteout, I appreciate that. But lower down, actually, there were lots of beautiful orange aspen that were surrounded by snow. So you could you could isolate them. But talking then to the group, we started just looking at the whole vista. And I've forgotten the name of the mountains in the background. I want to say San Jose Mountains, but I think I'm wrong. And we all realized this lovely sweep of color that just went across the frame and then back up the mountain was the image. And obviously there were lots of more subtle images, colors like the yellows and greens, and then some pinks and browns and greens. And personally, it's one of my favorite shots I think I've ever taken, because of the moment, because of that moment where the snow came down, and probably being British, that it's not going to last long. So get out there and get that picture. This was Colorado, so the snow does hang around a bit longer. And I think there was this kind of group moment where we just all saw that image and realized that's what it was. It wasn't isolation. It was show the glory of the aspen just springing out, catching the light with some white, spaces representing the Colorado snow. So yes, that's the background.
It's gorgeous, and I think it's gorgeous because conditions themselves are rarely enough to make a compelling photograph. That it still has to have compositional strength, flow, energy, all the good stuff we talk about, that contrast, colors, whatever it might be. And there's that sweep, like you say, sort of through the middle, that lovely curvature of how the trees, and obviously the colors just act as little sparklers on top. But that it can be very easy, and we may touch on this, when the conditions are kind of crazy or exciting, to abandon everything else about what you normally do with your photography. And you didn't. I wasn't commenting on that for you, but in terms of we all still need that bedrock, don't we? And then if you get those excellent conditions on top, then that's just the icing on the cake, so to speak. Just with that in mind, though, and I've just realised there's absolutely no way we're going to get through all the images tonight, but it's fine because we'll dig in and get some good stuff. Teresa has asked, I'm going to Hokkaido in February. How do I protect my camera and prevent condensation to make sure it stays functioning? Now, Tom, I'm just going to ask if you have any particular tips on that as someone who has travelled a bit in cold places, and then I'll throw it open if anyone else has stuff they want to throw in.
Well, on the first tip is definitely the batteries, charge them the night before and then keep them, if you possibly can, in an inside pocket near your body, because it's the batteries that go first. The condensation is an issue, but losing the power takes everything out. You can get the condensation on your lens, but generally, and the camera can also be a bit sluggish. So if the camera is very cold, you might find that on the screen things are just not happening as they're used to, or as you're used to. But as the camera warms up, which you can also keep in an inside pocket or certainly on its strap underneath your coat, that warms your camera up. Flip side is that does cause the condensation when it hits the cold air. But from my experience, I'm going to send this out to the others, but the condensation goes pretty quickly. And it's just a case of using your time to set your picture up and set the composition up. By the time you've done that, I've found historically that the condensation does just dissipate.
Yeah. Anyone else? And I don't mind adding a bit in, but anyone else, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's the rapid change in temperature that's the enemy here, isn't it? And I mean, I would say my tuck and tape knee. It's often tempting to to be shooting a scene like we've just seen Tom's lovely picture, and then you get back in the car and you want to see the picture on the back of your camera, and so you start playing around with the camera in the back of the car, a nice warm air conditioned car, and then you go back out again and when you see something else, and that sort of rapid change in temperature is really the enemy. And so I would, whenever I'm in conditions like this, I would always sort of resist the temptation and try and keep everything sort of at the ambient temperature. Leave the camera in the boot, packed in a camera bag, and not kind of bring it into a warm environment and expect to work it straight away.
That's also the thing when you come back to hotel. Leave the camera in the bag, because it's better. It can acclimatize itself better more slowly, rather than you come into your hotel room, take the camera out, and the condensation is bound to be there. So keep it in the bag, both in the car and then also when you come back. Yeah, is the key.
I would agree with all of that, and like Tom mentioned, batteries are probably your biggest problem actually. So keeping them to close to the body, as he mentioned, in inner pockets or in pockets on fleece layers, which are below coats or whatever it might be, is usually the biggest challenge. And if we flip to, I'm going to throw one in here because it's sort of relevant to what we're talking about. I have done a fair bit of traveling in and around winter mountain stuff. And when you're actually out and shooting, I don't find condensation I find it's rarely an issue because, a bit like Ed mentioned, I'm generally keeping the camera at the ambient temperature. Now, troublingly, that can be sort of -15 sometimes. So even in the bag, it's probably -10. But what that does mean, which also Tom alluded to, is that sometimes stuff slows down a little bit. Your menu can slow down or just stop sometimes. But these days the cameras are pretty good, and I've had less issues with newer stuff. So I don't think you'll have any big issues, Teresa, but I'm sure you'll have a fantastic trip. Right. Any other questions like that, do let us know, or any technical things or any other bits, just pop them in the comments. We'll try and pick them up. Right, I've got to ask myself something sensible here, haven't I? This is I'll just tell you a little bit briefly then. We're in the Dolomites, obviously an area I go to a fair amount. Why do I say obviously? My wife's Italian and she's from not far from there. So we do spend a fair bit of time there every year. And I wanted to throw in a big snowy one because I love shooting in the snow. A bit like I mentioned with Tom's though, the challenge is sometimes you get very excited because we're not used to walking around in 4-foot snow. And we're not used to seeing massive mountains, and I'm not used to seeing beautiful light on mountains which are dusted in snow. So you can just kind of lose your composure and just sort of not know where to look. So the reason I put this one in is because hopefully it speaks to a little bit of the simplicity that I enjoy working with in these sorts of conditions. B, you do still see some really interesting light at this time of year. Wherever you might be in the mountains or anywhere else, the light's very low, so you often get kind of nice side light. And when you then get snowstorms and whatnot coming through, you get very changeable conditions. From a very technical point of view here, and then if anyone else has any insults they want to throw at me, that I'm more than welcome to take them. I had only a 24-70 with me, which is a bit odd. Normally I'd have the 70-200 in my bag, but this was very cold this day. And for various reasons, I only had one kit with me because of the amount of walking we were having to do. And this looks like I'm in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't. I was on a fairly accessible path, but I had the camera about 3 feet above my head with the flip screen pointing down at me, because just in front of this, which you can't see at the low part of the image, there's like a 12-foot bank of snow where the path has been pushed out. So a victory for the flip screen, and also for all the gym work I'd done that year to hold my arms in the air for 5 minutes, because at sort of 70 mil, and I'm really trying to compose very precisely, but sort of looking up at the screen. If any of you have held your stuff in the air for about 10 minutes, the shakes are going on. And I really wish I'd had a slightly longer lens, but there we go. So that's that one. Any thoughts or questions from you guys before I jump on?
Sam, I mean, I think for me, what really stands out immediately is the relationship between the triangular peak and the little tree, the triangular little tree on the right hand side. There's a lovely juxtaposition there. But it's interesting. It's a quite bold split of the frame, isn't it, with the snow line quite high up. And I think many of us, perhaps myself included, would have started off by trying to compose less snow in the image and more mountain, because that's the drama with the light on it. So I'm interested as to why you chose that very bold composition, which I think works fantastically well, of having that snow line quite high in the frame.
Because I couldn't tip my arms any higher? No. No. Well, it's snowy, and if we want snow to be of interest in the frame, give it enough space, partially. Secondly, I quite like splitting things in two, in the same way you did on your vertical one, in a very definite down the middle. And yes, there's that triangular balance. I wanted to give enough space for the tree not to feel like it was being tugged down, as it were. It wanted to levitate a little bit further up. And also because of what was happening in the cloud above, you can just see a touch of blue there, but it was just starting to break above it. So I wanted to keep it a little more contained. And once you start letting in those breaks in the clouds, maybe we're letting the viewer out a little bit as well. In a way, I don't want that blue there, but I also think it works because of the color. You can see a bit of that blue coming through on the mountain side as well. And so I was happy with it. The one thing I really actually quite like, and why I gave it enough space as well, which is very difficult to see probably on the stream, there is a very gentle line, just a little ridge there, which absolutely made me happy to give that much space to it. Had it all not had that ridge to separate it, it would have just felt like a very heavy monotone area of snow, which probably would have flattened the whole thing off. But that ridge just defines nicely and allows it that space, basically. So there's subdivision in that division as well. But yes, cool. Let's jump on. Thank you, Ed, because we're coming to you next, and we're going to talk trees. And I'm excited because we've all put some tree stuff in, and it's all very different. And we've alluded to the fact that you can have these very bare trees. There can sometimes be spots of colour around. And Tom mentioned a little bit about isolating things. So this is what you've done very successfully here, Ed. And again, there's some lovely colour relationships going on. And I believe we're up in Scotland here.
We are. This is Northwest Highlands. This is Torridon. And I've got to credit, actually, a gentleman called Mark Littlejohn, who I'm sure will be well known to everybody, for spotting these trees. I was with him. We were walking down a valley, beautiful valley. And these Scots pines were just poking out of the amongst the birches on the opposite side of the valley. And he spied them, and then I basically elbowed him out of the way and took the composition. No, I had to obviously work quite hard to position the trees carefully, and I quite like the fact that there's a second tree which you can see sort of disappearing out of sight on the top right hand side. But I suppose I put this in because the lesson for me was there's no such thing as bad winter weather. I mean, in fact, actually, I sort of think back and wonder whether the shot would have even been there had it been a nice day. This was taken in typical Scottish rain, which was coming in at a 45-degree angle and, you know, giving everybody a free exfoliation. And, you know, it was really, really torrential. But what that's done is it's just softened off all of the contrast and made it a very kind of painterly backdrop. And, you know, clearly the other device I'm using here is, as you've alluded to, Sam, the color relationships and the contrast between those beautiful kind of russet tones, which fade from you know, saturated to non-saturated, bottom right to top left, and the green, proud Scots pine poking out in the frame. So that's really what I was getting at here. It's just, for me, this image is, you know, typical sense of place. It could only be Scotland, you know, Northwest Highlands, and just highlights the importance of having the right wet weather gear on so you can enjoy making images in this type of weather.
Let's just talk a little bit practically then about equipping yourself, because we mentioned looking after the batteries, because we did say this was winter images, but we wanted to give people a bit of help generally about being prepared to go out. We mentioned looking after your batteries, charging up, keeping them warm, being aware of condensation, etc. It's so critical. It sounds obvious, but I've been out with people who've struggled with this. We've got to be dry, we've got to be warm, right? That's the most important thing to start with.
And often you make the mistake, well, I've made the mistake many times, of thinking I'm warm. You know, you walk out of your car or minibus or whatever with 25 kilos on your back, and you hike for an hour and you think, oh, this is lovely and toasty. And then you stand behind your tripod for 20 minutes and realize you've underclubbed it with the clothing, because the temperature drop is a lot colder. No, I mean, the real enemy of creativity is not having the right focal length. It's actually, you know, thinking that you're having a miserable time because you're cold and wet and hungry, and that flask of coffee you've left in the car is far more tempting than waiting for the light to come good. And so, you know, being kitted out and having those extra layers is just super important. And you know, this was a pretty miserable wet day. I mean, we'd been walking for probably an hour and a half on a 3-hour hike, and you know, if I hadn't had decent quality waterproofs and, you know, warm layers underneath, then you know, I probably would have been head down, looking at my feet, you know, trudging along, and not having the antenna up, or at least not being able to elbow Mark Littlejohn out of the way to get this image. So it really is the enemy of creativity in winter is not having the right gear on, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely, can definitely back that up. We've had a technical question, not specific to this image, but I'm going to throw it to the group. And maybe this is general tips about this. Barbara's off to photograph the Northern Lights, hopefully, to Norway in February. I'm speaking for you on the part of your insurance people there by saying hopefully, as in you never know with the Northern Lights. Any thoughts on that, team? Anyone had experience shooting in that kind of way?
Yeah, I've been doing shooting Northern Lights, so it will depend on where you are and how they play ball, I suppose. We've been when I was shooting Northern Lights on a light and land trip with a couple of other leaders. The trick was to spot them, and the thing is that your eyes don't see them for a long time after your camera is able to see them. So you will have perhaps somebody with you to teach you, or if not, then the first thing is to spot them, which is to set your camera to its highest possible ISO and take indiscriminate pictures of the sky. And when something green turns up, then you're in business, and your eyes won't be able to see that. But once you've located them, and you obviously have some sort of dark location where you stand, and have taken care of all your batteries and all that, the next question is focus. So you can't autofocus in the middle of the night in pitch black. So you have to find something to focus on, pre-focus, perhaps take sticking plaster or something with you, change your focus mode to manual and stick the thing shut so it doesn't move, so that you don't accidentally turn your focus ring on your lens. And then when you have done that, then all you have to do is have probably a wide open lens, wide open aperture, and put in a few seconds of shutter speed, and then see what you get. And the more active they are, the shorter your shutter speed will get. when they're really active and dancing around, the movement is quite quick overhead. So you want a short shutter speed of probably of no more than a second, because otherwise it'll just be one big blur. So you may then have to up your ISO higher and higher so that you can keep to that short shutter speed. If it's sometimes it's kind of stationary, then you can have a longer shutter speed and you can, get your lower ISO as well. But if it's really busy, you have to shorten your shutter speed and basically adjust with the ISO for the exposure. That's how we did it. Or we were all on tripods. I remember. Well, not we, but the cameras. And and then also, I mean, in February, so it'll be a polar night presumably. So maybe you will have some lovely sort of twilight between sort of 11 and 3 during the daytime, and then you'll be sleeping before and after, and northern lights in the evenings, late evenings, perhaps early wee hours of the morning. So be prepared for.
Can I just jump in, because listening to you, I've not shot the northern lights. I have done some star photography, and the other risk obviously is having too long an exposure and having blurry stars, which may not help the image if you can see the stars. But it sounds really silly what I'm going to say next, but know your camera well so that you can be changing things in the dark quickly. So literally get your fingers ready for changing your ISO and change your exposure. You can set the aperture, not probably change that one. But some people do struggle and they go, hold on, hold on, which way and once you start doing that, you're kind of probably losing some key moments. So it sounds ridiculous, but I think it's quite a common thing on groups that we help people get their fingers around the camera.
Then you'll turn your torch on to look at your camera settings and ruin everybody else's images.
And the other thing is, I remember that when I went, the only lens I had was f4 with the aperture maximum f4, and I was advised, and I think this was very useful, to hire another lens with a wider aperture.
Yeah, I've only shot the northern lights a couple of times, but I've been told, I mean, when I did it, it was sort of a minimum, if you can get a minimum f2.8 or faster.
Yes, exactly.
And you can start at f2.8 or f1.4 if possible, wide open, and you maybe start at 1600 or 2800 ISO at 10 or 15 seconds, and then it's trial and error from there. As wide as possible and as fast as possible in terms of focal length and lens, if you can. Or borrow or hire a particular lens if you haven't got one in the arsenal. Yeah.
Cool. There you go, Barbara. Hopefully that'll help. I hope you have a great time. And I was only teasing. I'm sure you'll see loads of lights. Astrid,
yes.
We wanted to throw in a few different things tonight, as we've said, not just snow. We've got some detailed stuff coming up later. We've got a lot of the trees. We've got some wider views. We've got some urban stuff coming up later, everyone. So thank you for sticking with us. We'll do about an hour, as per usual. So we've got another 20 minutes or so to go, and we'll get through as much as we can. You're welcome, Barbara. But let's talk about interpreting things in a different way, playing with stuff creatively. And I know you obviously love to experiment. So this has got a lovely golden wash of Christmas all over it. So maybe explain A, where we are, and B, maybe a little bit of the technicals of what's going on here.
Yeah, so we are in Bruges, where we were last week with Light and Land. And so December, Christmas time, and no snow, which is why we had to make do with other imagery. Obviously, Bruges architecture is one of the big features of the town, of the city. The other big feature is the water and the canals. That always entices me to play with double or multiple exposures because I love combining some really characteristic elements of a place into one image. Still being able to see what it is, but combining elements, and the water, which you see the water reflections of, taken at night, and the architecture, in this case, an old, it's actually a hotel on the right, the sort of timber framed, and the church towers towards the left. That's just sort of fun, and it's again one of those things you can see and try out anywhere without having to travel to far-flung locations where if you don't have snow, for example. The one image with the water reflections was shot at night, and that's why it's sort of glistening, as you can see. And the houses were basically, I just was leaning out of the window of the hotel with my mobile phone at that. And it's all lit, nicely lit, and this golden glow is the sort of evening light, basically. And then just put them together. So mobile phone shots, multiple exposure in the mobile phone. That means you don't necessarily have to have enormous amounts of gear to lug around. If you are alert to things that you can see wherever you are, I can go in a restaurant or go in a church or go around a park and I can see stuff. Anything will do, and anything is possible for an interesting image. As before, I love the play of sort of warm and cold with the different colors. So you have the sort of bluish tones in the water reflection, and then the golden yellow in the houses. And I just love that kind of interplay. And then some round bits, some corners. So I love juxtapositions of these sort of things.
Yeah, no, sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, I know the difficulty, the gateway to this sometimes is people aren't quite sure whether things go together, or how do you know what to look for with X, Y, Z? And that's an impossible question in a way. But do you agree? Because I spent a period doing similar kind of vibes, working on multiple exposure things in a different landscape. But there's a sort of freedom of being able to create your image, create your landscape. It's an altered landscape, isn't it? But do you find that as you've become more experienced with this, you start to understand what you're then looking for as layers? So, for example, you might be looking for a certain color to complement that from the wash, or you might be looking for a certain type of texture. Would you agree?
Yes, that's true. But the freedom it brings is the fun bit. Yes, I always look for a sort of a kind of a pattern or a texture as one of the layers, usually the sort of bottom layer, and then whatever else I put on top, shot of details or something, buildings or whatever else I might find. But sort of a texture layer. I mean, I can photograph anything there. In Bruges, we photographed pavements and water reflections and all sorts of things that you can use as a pattern for a multiple exposure, and then put something else on top, basically superimpose it. And by doing so, combining the two elements. If it's just been the single shot with the buildings, there would have been, a dark nondescript sky. And by combining it with another layer, you sort of get rid of that, and you combine the two elements, and it does appeal to me. So,
yeah.
I mean, we've done any number of these. The people on my group will testify that we've only just been back, and it's great stuff. And obviously, it works well at Christmas time because you have lights and you have everything's lit and everything is shone at, and there's Christmas trees everywhere, and
lots of rich subject matter, isn't it? And I think
exactly.
in
ideal
urban environments at night, there's loads of cool lights as well. So if you're watching out there, Snapseed is a really cool app to play with, blending your images together. There's all sort of image modes and blends and all this sort of stuff. So I'm going to keep us moving just for time reasons, but definitely if you're interested in creating your own unique imagery that is going to be different every time, even with yourself, then experimenting with some of those multiple exposures is a really good way to go. Now, keeping this warmth, this warm color feel, we're jumping to Tom, and Tom, now we're into some of your trees, and although I mentioned that color warmth, I also get the feeling of this is probably bloody freezing from this image as well. And we talked before about positioning. That's again a fairly bold, low positioning, isn't it, of these trees, and we're allowing lots of space for the sky. So give us a bit of your thoughts on maybe the composition, and again a bit of the background on the shot, perhaps.
Thank you. Yeah, super quickly. This was in Finland, north of a place called Rovaniemi. I think a lot of people go there for Lapland and to meet the real Santa, because that's where he lives, whatever your kids tell you. And this is on a frozen lake. So talking about shooting in winter, there is a health and safety aspect to it. And we shouldn't have been where we were but we didn't realise. So that's but I made it back. But do be careful on frozen lakes. And actually, I'll be quite blunt. I don't love this image. There's too much colour for me. The reason I put it in is because I find it quite an interesting situation to be in, where you're on it. It's in Finland. There was about 3 hours of daylight, so you can see the sun rising on the left. It doesn't go much higher than that, then it goes back down. And I was just blown away by the place, by the pinkness of the snow, and the frozen lake, by the rainbow color that the sun was just, just throwing everywhere, because the air was so pure and so clear, because it was so cold. And then in the middle of this lake is this little island, which, here you could just walk to, but normally you wouldn't be able to access it other than by boat. And it was just absolutely stunning to be there. When I took the shot, which, I was lost in the kind of beauty of the whole thing, I've looked back at it and thought it's just not quite, it's not quite right. And it's probably not very sensible to put up a picture that I critique directly at myself, but I think actually it's too low down. I think there should be a bit more space in the foreground. It still blows me away because I remember being there. And I think here I definitely had a battery issue. So I'd gone out with just 2 batteries, and I didn't have very long because both just died very quickly. And this was with the old Canon 5D, I think, the first with the Mark 1. And I agree with you, Sam, that a lot of the technology now has got better, and the cameras can deal with this. The extremes are much better. But I think the blue, and I hear Ed and I say this a lot on our when we run our groups, it's gone way too aquamarine for me. And so as much as I like what I saw, I don't love. I've captured it. It's what it was, but I don't think it works as much as a photograph. But I thought it was a good time to put something like this on this channel because of the nature of it. And when you're out there and you see beautiful things, it doesn't always translate brilliantly on your camera. So you're not on your own if that does happen to you.
We're all nodding sagely. Yeah. So just briefly then, Tom, if we look back at it, what might be 1 or 2 things you would try to do differently? You mentioned a little bit about the positioning and maybe the coloration a bit.
I think it could be lower down. I think I could easily, I could reduce the saturation and make it less unbelievable, which it was. I think there could be more separation with the trees, and I think that's a post-processing thing. I think you could really bring the blacks out of those trees, and Astrid mentioned about the shapes of trees without their leaves, and here you can see that. You can see the branches, and each, obviously there'd be a lot of work, but I think you could just bring forwards the blackness of the island, reduce the saturation of the trees. It's not a black and white image, that it would work, but I think probably slightly gloomy one. And I think just rebalance it a little bit so that you've got less of the rainbow effect and a bit more foreground.
Yeah, well, it goes back to that thing we said, doesn't it? It's very easy to be overwhelmed by, I'm not saying you were, but you know what I mean. It's bloody freezing. All parts of you are freezing. Your camera suddenly feels like you've never touched it before in your life. Your brain hurts, but it's beautiful at the same time. And I suppose it's keeping, and absolutely, I know exactly what you're saying. It's keeping your brain on all those little finite details if you can when you're there. But I thank you for picking it apart for us.
You're supposed to say you like it. You didn't.
No, I do like it, but I think joking aside, it wasn't just a big congratulatory thing tonight. We did want to talk about different scenarios people might find themselves in, and also I wanted to talk about what excited us all about shooting in winter. And we mentioned gloomy black and white. Excellent segue, Tom, without even knowing it, because I also wanted to mention gloomy black and white, because I noticed actually there's only a couple of black and whites that got put in tonight, and I do work a lot in black and white, especially in these times of year, because you often get very nice subdued light, soft, a bit of fog sometimes, and this is very local to me. So echoing what Astrid mentioned earlier, that yes, it's all very well to go around the world or to go to very dramatic places. I mentioned the Dolomites, whatever it might be, and obviously I absolutely love that, but I do try to get out. We joked before we came live on air that a lot of us haven't had much time recently to actually do our own shooting, But I think it's really important to get out as much as you can locally, even if it's just for a walk for a couple of hours and you just throw the camera over your shoulder without having any great expectations. So this is a local woodland to me. And again, I don't get snow here in Dorset, but we do get a fair amount of fog and mist, and especially in winter, where you can see, as we've alluded to here, the shapes of the trees a lot more clearly. In the spring and summer and autumn even, this would be a very different scene, and actually there wouldn't be an image there, because I think for me the image here is just about those shapes and obviously those kind of pincer-like arms coming down and sort of the bending over. Now that kind of general vibe I see a lot of people, we see shapes, don't we, in the landscape, and we see them a lot in trees. So it's a theme that I think is oft seen, shall we say, but it can be a nice way to keep your eye sharp to other shapes and other impressions and things you may find in the landscape, whilst all the while getting out locally and exploring. So again, black and white for me here, because the colour isn't bringing anything to it, and secondly, actually, because I enjoy working in grey. Can I say that? It is black and white, but it's grey. I love grey. I love all the shades of grey. And so when you get this sort of weather, where you have these soft, muted kind of vibes, then I actually work in a very low contrast, middle of the histogram kind of area in these types of scenarios. Yes, there's some darker areas, and yes, there's some brighter highlights because of the sky, but in general, we get grey here, I would argue, more than anything else. So yes, we've shown you lots of places around the world, but there's always some great stuff you can hopefully find locally. I'm going to keep us rolling because we've got 10 minutes left, and I want to try and get through another one of everyone's if we can. And Ed, you threw a curveball at us, but there's a reason for that, correct? We're not always seeing snow. We're not always seeing amazing things. And a lot of us might be in more urban environments generally, but winter does offer a particular quality of light, doesn't it? And I think that's hopefully what we're working on here a bit as well.
Definitely. Yes, well, your lovely tree image with that great sort of energy and dynamism of the shapes local to you, this is my equivalent. This is, I live in London, and so not far away from me. This is what I've got, and I think that one of the things that many of us have to confront is, you look out the window and you see the weather's not brilliant and the forecast is terrible, and you think, well, maybe not today for the photography. But there's an awful lot of stuff you can do in notionally poor weather. One of which is to find a nice woodland to go and shoot, which you've obviously done, Sam, as illustrated in your prior image, and the other of which is to try something new, try a bit of architecture. And this particular shot doesn't need amazing weather. I mean, it was still raining when I took this image in the city, and making images locally to me of abstracts and building facades and little architectural details is something that I kind of fall back on when perhaps you look at the forecast and realize that that trip to the coast or trip to the Lake District is probably not going to yield a hugely productive time. So yeah, and I suppose the other thing, as you alluded to, I mean, I got lucky in the sense that when I went out, I didn't expect anything like this kind of light, but often you find, as I'm sure many people will recognize, sometimes you can get the best light just as the storm breaks, and that's exactly what happened here. And I'm very fortunate to be there. But often if you wait until the forecast is fantastic, and indeed you look out the window and it looks great, you probably missed it. You want to sort of almost commit and head out when the weather's at its worst, as long as there is an improving outlook, in order to catch the particular light that you get. The quality of winter light when perhaps a storm front has just moved through is really unbelievable sometimes, and that's what happened to be in evidence here. And just that, again, I sort of, my antenna start to go off when I see these kind of abstract shapes that I can construct into an image, into making something coherent, and the light on the side of the building and in the clouds just really tops it off.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's really lovely, very graphical, and like you say, that steely blue, deep blue. You know, we all know that, don't we? Those sort of rain clouds, just light coming underneath. It's a great time of winter. I'm gonna keep us rolling because we're just gonna do 2 minutes each on these. All right, gang. Then we can all get one extra in. Thank you, Ed. Brenda? What is the wall on the right? I would assume that's some sort of accommodation or.
It's actually an office building. It's an office building. I think it's called the Mizuno building in the city of London. And it's a curving facade, and it looks like a sort of set of library books, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I always think of when I see it. But I've taken it with a telephoto lens, so it's really compressed perspective. Actually, in between the little library books, there's actually windows. But I've sort of played a trick with focal length there and compressed it. But that's what it is. It's an office building.
It's a Dulux swatch. And on that impertinent note, I'm going to keep moving. All right. Yes, just a couple of minutes, everyone, on these, and then we'll squeeze in one each. So we've got 3 images left. All right. We're going to do a couple of moments each. Astrid, we've obviously done a bit on trees tonight. I wanted to put this in again because of for a number of reasons. Beautifully composed. The balance of the bear at the top, the colours and the leaves and the bracken and whatnot underneath. But what is it about this image that made you choose it, Astrid, to put in our section tonight?
Well, it starts echoing all the stuff we said before. You don't always have snow. This is outside Bruges, along one of the canals. So I loved the misty. We had misty weather and very nondescript sky. So I try and exclude the sky pretty much. I love the sort of the canals that have these tree lines along, and there's always some color to be had. So this is deepest winter, but we have these fantastic yellow colors on the sort of the bracken and the stuff that grows along the side of the water. And I just love the interplay between those bright colors and the sort of stark nature of the trees, and the mist in the background just gets rid of whatever else there is. A few little sort of trees that shine through the gaps there, but I just love the colors. And when you're out in winter, even if the weather forecast is for bland sky, go somewhere with trees, go somewhere where it's covered, where you don't have to have sky, and look for shapes and look for colors. That's what you have to do.
Good advice. And there's been a nice few examples of isolating pictures today, picking out elements of the landscape, but also we've had some broader images and kind of opening them up. And talking of which, we've got kind of this is sort of screaming filmic kind of vibe to me, actually, Tom. And obviously there's all sorts of cool things which appeal to me here in terms of big open spaces, the colours and the graphical repetition, etc. But what floated your boat and made you put it in tonight's section, Tom?
I saw this and I thought immediately of Fargo, the film that from way back that I loved and do still love, and it's exactly that. It was filmic, and it was just this one red giant warehouse. The trees left and right had red in them, which I thought was quite cool, because basically this was a monochrome scene, but suddenly with a bright red house in the middle, and this very main road going straight down. So you'd have these huge lorries going up and down it. So it was all about Fargo. I think it was that triggered everything. I loved the fact that actually in the snow, it doesn't really show on the screen, but you can see the tracks going off of different vehicles. So it's not really my style at all, but the simplicity of it, standing straight in front of it and the trees just growing out from the sides, it just it sort of seemed to be a perfect photo opportunity. And from a tip point of view, if we're trying to kind of add a bit of value, I remember using exposure compensation a lot here, and it was in my notes I wanted to mention that often when you shoot snow, and Ed has mentioned it can be a bit grey or a bit darker than you expect because your camera is overriding it. And a lot of people don't use exposure compensation, but I use it all the time, and I remember using it here. And it's just, you shift it up +1, it's going to be brighter, -1, it gets darker. and it's a much easier way of shooting snow, and if you just push that exposure compensation. But the shot for me was, I did this in medium format on my Hasselblad, and I've cropped it because of the nature of the shape of the house. But I still have it. I did it on film, and it was you get less of the digital issues when you shoot on film. So it's worth remembering that.
No, and thank you for mentioning that, Tom, because I know we've talked a bit about the images, but actually from a tip point of view, absolutely, exposure compensation is your friend in winter scenes. Like you, I'm generally walking around on aperture priority, and then I'll just dial that up with the exposure compensation because, as Ed mentioned as well, your camera will generally meter snow too dark. It wants to make it grey, so it pulls your exposure down, and then you get that wishy-washy, which of course you can edit afterwards, that's fine, but I find it's better to get it closer when you're out there. It keeps your spirits up when you look back through your files as well. And also you don't want to be always pushing a load of exposure comp in Lightroom. You want to be getting that in the raw file, because actually your raw file will then become bigger. You'll actually have more data in it the further up to the right of the histogram it is, which will mean it'll be higher quality, which will mean you can do more with it. So thank you, Tom. That's an excellent general tip. I'm going to just finish. I can't actually remember, so it's going to surprise me as well when it comes. But before we do, thank you everyone for watching. We're just going to do one more. Yes, I cheated. That's right. This is the cheat one. I said to everyone, give me 4 images, and I cheated because I put 3 into 1. And the reason I did this was, again, just talking about tips and ways we all work slightly differently. I love working in the detail, in the kind of macro scenes, as it were. Those inner landscapes, I think, is what they're trendily called these days. And I think there are times where you don't need to be somewhere amazing looking, but there are other worlds at your feet, I suppose. And so with some concentration and with some thought about the colors, about the shapes, about the flow, all these things we talk about sometimes, you can find little details like this. And the reason I put them in as a 3, a little set like this, is I think if you do find something you happen upon, it could be leaves, it could be water like this, it could be sand dunes, even not on a winter scale, but you know what I'm saying, it could be shapes of snow, anything. If you feel like something from that inner landscape works, keep looking around in that area, because there might be more than just 1 or 2 or 3 images. You might be able to get a little set of 3 or 6 or 9 or whatever it might be that work nicely together. And here I'm just looking at a very nondescript stream with a beer factory behind it, of all things, which is, yes, where I would like to have been afterwards. But obviously there's ice, and I really love the colour, thinking about the blues and keeping the water moving and getting the texture in the ice to contrast with just enough softness in the water to kind of tease that.
Do you see the face?
Contrast. Yes.
Bottom right?
Yeah.
The face at the bottom? It's somebody doing like that or something?
Yeah.
I do see it.
Oh my God. That was creepy.
Have I scared you? Sorry.
No. It's like what's this? With these 3.
Shrek,
yeah.
One like that and one like that. So.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because we talked about what we see in things, in the trees or in you can, and once you start to see those things, it can be quite fun to play with them. But in general terms, I did cheat, but I wanted to say, if you find a little thing like this that works, run with it and try and do some other stuff around it to maybe put a little set together. And then it can be really fun to curate where do they go. And I'm not proposing this actually works particularly well in this 3, but that's a fun conversation to have with yourself after the fact as well. But cool. Let me just stop that for a second. I want to wrap it up because we've gone a little bit over. I'm very, very, very appreciative of all my guests giving up an hour of their time and some time beforehand to pick images out, and me hassling them, send me your images. So I appreciate you all for giving the time up, and hopefully everyone on the stream has found this useful. We've probably got enough left to have next year's already sorted, so that's good. So Astrid, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Tom, thank you as well for coming along.
Thank you.
And Ed, of course, good man, thanks for coming along.
Been a pleasure. Happy Christmas, everybody.
Yes.
Happy Christmas.
Yes, happy Christmas.
We did want to end with that. This is the last live stream of 2023. We will be back like we mentioned, on hopefully January the 9th with myself, Astrid, and Charlie Waite, and we're going to be talking about curating your images generally. Thanks for all the fab comments coming in. I can't quite keep up with them and talk and finish this all in one go. But I just want to say thank you. I appreciate you all watching. Do get out and shoot as much as you can locally. And we'd love to see some of your winter images. Maybe next time we can include some of your work too. We're hoping to do some other sort of themed shows throughout next year, maybe to do sort of woodland, autumnal, springs, colours, abstracts, creative techniques, whatever it might be. So if you've got something you'd like to see or a theme you might like us to cover, we can dig into the pool of photographers we have and get into our back catalogues and chat about them. And like I say, hopefully we'll try and find a way to engage you guys and see some of your images too, because that'd be really fun. But I will wrap it up. Happy Christmas, all the rest of it, and we'll see you in 2024. Goodbye.
Goodbye.